Hi there, so my name is Joanna McCormick and I'm an artist. I work across lots of different disciplines in my art, so I'm predominantly a painter, but I also work with 3 dimensions. I do live art, interactive performances, and I'm mostly working in 3 dimensions around delivering those. I also teach, and I'm a curator as well, and I run workshops for people of all ages. I'm trained in reminiscence, so I work quite often with elderly people. I was trained by Westminster Arts as part of their Resonate programme, specialising in working with people who have dementia. So my work is like very multifaceted. Today's date is the 11th of October 2024. Just had lunch at Corner, New Cross, and this is my studio. I'm really lucky to have this massive room in New Cross Gate. It's in a community centre in New Cross Gate. I was using a room downstairs, and I'm just going to take you down there because some of my artwork is still on display in that room. So let's go downstairs and I'll answer some more questions. So I'm in room 2 now, but this is room 4 where I was up until last week. And I will just switch the lights on. So some of my work is still on the walls. So the question was, what is your background? So I was born in Surrey, Greater London, in a place called Roehampton, and when I was a kid we moved from Putney to Richmond, and so it's kind of semi-rural, suburban upbringing. My dad is an architect. He's now retired, but he was working as an architect. My parents, when they met, were very young, so he was still a student, so they were quite impoverished when we were little. But then through hard work, he became quite wealthy working as an architect professionally, always drawing. His cousin was an artist, is an artist. And so I've always been around that creativity. I've drawn from a really early age, always drawing, making art. And in terms of how that influenced me, so not only was I had the ability to be creative and make art. So given that background with creativity going on at home, I had the access to the materials. My dad would let me use his they were rotary pens in those days because they would do everything by hand as architects. So I could use his special equipment and draw and everything. And I was given my first set of oil paints aged 13, around about that age, by my mum's friend. And so I kind of self-taught how to use oil paint, which can be, although if you come to my classes I can teach you how to do it really easily, but it can be a struggle to learn. It can be a tricky medium. It's a beautiful medium, I love it, but it can be tricky. So I was very fortunate in that my creativity was, not frowned upon. It was allowed, and I had access to the materials and equipment from an early age, and I would just take myself off and draw, spend hours and hours just drawing. And also in terms of where I was, so nature has always been a really strong theme in my work. So we lived in quite a sort of rural area. We're very near to Kew Gardens, the Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew. We were also very near to Richmond Park as well, so there was all these areas of like wide open spaces and beautiful nature. And so later on I actually did manage to secure Arts Council funding to create some sculptures, mushroom sculptures, based on nature, and working with a storytelling group out in Surrey. and we did, this is totally unprepared, we did, I did some reminiscence sessions with them, and then created these giant sculptures. And there's a little hole here for a speaker. So these were set up for sound. They were exhibited with the National Trust over at their Polesden Lacey. It's a massive manor house over in Surrey. It's a really, really beautiful location. And I had the tea rooms that used to be the stables, and I created these. They were part of an installation. And I put all the stories on audio. This was analog back in the 90s, no, 2002. And you would put your ear and you could listen to the stories that I collected from the reminiscence sessions I did with elderly people in the area. So that was influenced by my upbringing and where I was living and everything else. This is an example of one of the props from one of my live art performances. It's a mask, it's a tiger mask, and I made this puppet as well. So with my live art performance, I worked with an artist called Sarah Sparks as part of her chutney preserves, and with chutney she brings together lots of different artists. They work to a theme and create live art interactions and performances. And this one I manifested as a tiger. This was soon after the general election, where it was a coalition government with the Liberal Democrats and the Tories did a deal, and it was all very sad. Well, for me at the time. Politics is a very strong theme in my work, and so the idea was I was the Tory beast. I think the theme was numbers, and I got number 6, so I was 666, the Tory beast, with the Lib Dem Tiger Club puppet, and we did the thing at Supernormal, which is a crazy festival out near Reading, I think it is. So that was lots of fun. That's an example of that. And then these are examples of my oil paintings. These are my large-scale oil paintings. So I'm also not only influenced by nature. A lot of the time I have the sea. There's little creatures and insects and birds and butterflies. In my reminiscence work, I'm really interested in the idea of collecting stories from elderly people who might have memories about wildlife, and we can sort of impact or kind of measure the impact of global changes and environmental changes through memory. So if you speak to someone really elderly, I mean, some of the people I spoke to would have memories of walking down an area that was called Lark Lane in Surrey, and all the larks would fly up out of the long grass as they were walking along the lane, and that just doesn't happen anymore because larks are an endangered species. So I've always put that kind of thing into my work. And there's a lot of politics as well, and I have ADHD, so I'm always kind of putting quite a lot of different information in, and I'll write poems and lyrics. I do sing as well, as sometimes as part of my delivery of my art. And so some of the writing is my own lyrics or my own poetry, but also song lyrics from what's out there, or poetry, or an extract from a novel or something that I've read and really enjoyed. And so, for example, on here you've got HMS Beagle, which is Darwin's boat when he was going out researching. And I read about from some extracts from his diaries, and that quote there is about the butterflies, where they were in the middle of the ocean, and it says, one evening when we were about 10 miles from the Bay of San Blas, vast numbers of butterflies in bands or flocks of countless myriads, extended as far as the eye could see. So basically they suddenly, the ship was engulfed in all these butterflies, and it goes on to say it was snowing butterflies. And it's just such a really powerful image, and the idea as well of where did they come from, in these butterflies in the middle of the ocean, you know, how nature can be so magical, and we just really don't appreciate it enough, in my opinion. So in terms of influences, there are so many. I'm always kind of being influenced even by people that I know, contemporary artists that my friends and things like that. I kind of get inspired by what they're doing, and sometimes decide to experiment in some different way because of that. But so in terms of my live art interactive work, I just had an exhibition open last night over at Corner New Cross, which is a really lovely cafe with this massive basement gallery downstairs. It's beautiful. And I co-curated an exhibition with two artist friends of mine, Kate Mayer and Diane Wallace, and we called it Sublimation, and it was examining the idea of energy and creative process as energy, so artists creating out of nothing, creating material objects and artifacts. And within that, I delivered my Cake Smash live art interaction, which is influenced a bit by the artist Pippilotti Rist, who is an amazing artist who works in sculpture and installation and creates these environments. And she has this video called, I think it's called Ever After All, and it's just so beautiful. It's a really amazing, kind of very quite simple piece, where it's this woman walking down the street in, I think it's New York, and she's carrying what looks like a big flower, a red hot poker flower, and she's dressed in a lovely dress, and she's got red shoes, and she's sort of like just walking along really happily, and the soundtrack is really lovely, kind of la la la, and sort of whistling, and like beautiful kind of tranquil song of like all happy, and then she suddenly just gets this what looks like a flower and whacks it into the car window that as she's walking past. There are cars parked along the road, and it smashes, and then she's just like ah, la la la, and carries on doing it. And then this policeman walks towards her, a female policeman, and the policeman kind of clocks her and goes like that and smiles at her. So it's like it's this totally surreal world where she's allowed to vandalize these cars, and the police are just like, yeah, great, you know. And to me, it's quite a complex, multi-layered piece. I say simple, like the idea is simple, but the meaning is complex and multi-layered. But one of the main takeaways for me was about female rage and expressing your anger, and how we are, you know, as women, you know, from a feminist point of view, if you look at it, you know, analysing it in that sense, the idea of how we are taught to repress our rage, and we're not allowed to ever be angry or be violent or express ourselves in that way. So I delivered last night the live art interaction Cake Smash, which came from the live art interaction Vox Chocs Nippy Made, which started out, so that was the beginning of Cake Smash, started out in Vox Chocs, which is where when you get a box of chocolates and you have the plastic tray that the chocolates sit in, I got interested in, well, what kind of shapes would those make if I cast them in plaster? They're not the true shapes of the chocolate, but they're kind of interesting, weird shapes. So I would make these miniature sculptures cast out of the packaging, out of the chocolate, cast from the chocolate tray, and then paint them all up really lovely and make them look very pretty, and then I would manifest as Nippy Made. So back in the 1920s there was a series of tea houses called the Lions Tea Houses, and the waitresses there were called nippy maids because they were so fast, nipping around, and they had a reputation for being, you know, really good at their jobs and that sort of thing. So I would manifest as a nippy maid and then offer the Vox chocks for sale at 50p each. So it's a comment on, you know, not just feminism or women's roles in society, but also the value of art and what is art, and also the idea of, you know, is these chocolates which are not edible, so they become something else, and what's real, you know, they're cast from the space where the chocolate occupies the space in the tray, and so lots of different kind of meanings within that. And then it developed into, I started casting different shapes of different food packaging, and building different art objects, and I build these cakes which can range in size from really, really big. I once did a cake smashing in the back of a truck for a delivery truck, an open-sided, you know, delivery truck, for Vanya Balog, who's an artist and curator, one of his exhibitions that he curated with Danny Pockets. I think it was Big Deal number, I can't remember what number 10 or something. And I made a really massive cake, sculpture, and then delivered Cake Smash. But last night it was on a smaller, slightly smaller scale, more like a real cake. It was quite tall, but the actual circumference was normal cake size. And so I glue the shapes cast from food packaging together using plaster, and then decorate it with acrylic paint and glitter and gold and silver leaf and beads and buttons and objects that have got broken. So you might have some toy fragments in there or some broken crockery, and make it look really, really beautiful, and then put lots of PVA icing, or I use Mod Podge as well, and glitter, and so it becomes this really beautiful creation, in my opinion, my humble opinion. And then the actual live art process is where I then deconstruct it using hand tools, so basically a mallet and chisels, and I'm smashing this cake up to a soundtrack. So this time I collaborated with the artist Kimball Bumstead. You can find him on this channel as well. I believe he's been interviewed for this. His work's really interesting. He works in abstraction, but he also works in sound, so doors and paints, but he also works in sound. So we collaborated on a soundscape to accompany the Cake Smash in live art interaction. With Kimball on the soundscape, but I also, when I deliver the Cake Smash, I also sometimes sing. So this time I sang I Turn on the Tap and the Water Flows, which is a song all about global inequality and lack of water in certain areas of the world, fits in with the theme of environmental destruction that we're wreaking on ourselves through, you know, food culture, disposable culture. A lot of this food packaging is not even recyclable, you know, so kind of ideas surrounding that, and frivolity and waste and all this kind of thing. So that was, yeah, yesterday. So my influence is, you know, Marina Abramovich is an incredible performance artist, so just the idea of being able to deliver art as a performance is something that fascinates me, and how interesting it is. Yayoi Kusama, I love her work and her use of abstraction and repetition and environments. In terms of what I absolutely love, you know, the theatre work of Punch Drunk, for example, where it's an immersive environment, just things that are very unusual. So in terms of that, it's like theatre that's experienced in a very, very unusual way from the norm, and something that really you can really sort of, it's almost like a dream-like quality. It's sort of experiencing something very different. So that's what I hope for. I hope to convey in my work. And also in terms of influences, I teach a class called Exploring Creativity, where we look at different artists each week. I do a little lecture about them, do lots of research around them and their life and their work, or lives. They may still be alive. I do contemporary artists as well as artists that are historical and no longer practicing, you know, they've passed away. And then, so I do that as a lecture, and then we have a break and a discussion, and then come back and I do a practical demonstration, making work inspired by that week's artist. And the students in the class either follow along and do a similar thing, or they do their own thing. And so every week, when I'm running that class, I'm running it pretty much weekly, it's on Zoom, I'm learning about a new artist, and I sometimes am influenced by them, but certainly on that day when I create the artwork, it's very much influenced directly by that week's artist. And I've got some of the examples here. So this is when we did the Guerrilla Girls, who are an amazing group of New York women, women based in New York, and you might have heard you know, they're famous for their slogans. They're feminists. They wear gorilla masks, so they remain anonymous, and they're proactively protesting about women's place in art, you know, the fact that women are overlooked in art history, and so they make posters. They would go and do fly postering around the city with slogans, so things like does a woman have to be naked to get into the Museum of Modern Art, Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art, I think it was, and then with the statistics that 85% of the work of the art, I think 85% of women in the museum are actually nude paintings of women, and only 15% of the collection is actually by women artists, and then of that, hardly any is ever on display. And there has been a movement recently, I know we're in 2024, where there's a book written by, I think, Katie Hessel, The History of Art Without Men, which is tackling that very thing of how women artists have been written out of history, and actually growing up, to go back to the earlier question about, you know, how my upbringing influenced my work. It's, you know, when you're reading about art and there's no women artists, there's no women cubists, there's no women abstract expressionists, you know, it's all about the men who founded those movements and things. And actually there were a lot of women doing really groundbreaking work. You know, abstract art, European abstract art was invented by a woman, and it's only just now that people are recognising that. Collage, the actual genre of collage, was invented by a woman. So every week. So yeah, the Guerrilla Girls, this is a self-portrait of me as a guerrilla girl, and smash the patriarchy. You know, something more kind of traditional maybe. We were looking at the work of John Bratby, who's a really interesting still life artist in the 60s. Did very expressive, kind of cluttered still life paintings. He's a really interesting artist, so you know, I did that. And so this one is one I made in a class on Maria Primachenko, who is an amazing Ukrainian folk artist, and her work, a lot of her work was destroyed during the war, where one of the museums was bombed, and the work was lost. So this piece is kind of talking about that, like quite simplistic really, but straightforward. Yeah.